The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. The phrase, the Holy Spirit will come upon you, signifies the role of the Holy Spirit in bringing about this conception. The power of the Most High will overshadow you emphasizes that this conception involves divine intervention and is something extraordinary. The term overshadow is often interpreted as a symbol of God's protection and of God's creative presence, similar to the way in which the glory of God overshadowed the tabernacle in the Old Testament. Psalm 91 speaks of a God who protects, who overshadows, who assures of safety those who trust in God, those who do not fear. And I may have shared this story, but I felt like it fit in today's message. And that is that for our 10th anniversary, Charlotte and I joined a delegation of what was called Christian Peacemaker Teams. Now it's Community Peacemaker Teams. And we joined them on a delegation to Colombia, South America, to the river Opon. And it was a time when the campesinos there were being displaced by the paramilitary and the guerrilla, both fighting over access to the petroleum there to then sell the petroleum for arms to fuel their conflict. And so we got to the house of Don Cachaco, who lived in a ciénaga, like a lake, pristine, beautiful, sat up on a hill, simple cinder block house. And he was there with his wife and his young child, Diana. And when we got there, he went into his home and came outside holding a little framed psalm that had been hanging on his wall. It was Psalm 91. And he had a request for us. He said, at night, he said, the foxes are coming at night and they're killing our chickens. They're not taking the chickens, they're not eating the chickens, they're just killing the chickens. And as sustenance, fisher folks down by the river and farmers, they relied on these chickens for their eggs, for their protein. And so he said, I want you all to pray Psalm 91 for me, for us, for our family, for our chickens. But he got even more specific. He said, what I want you to do is I want you to take this and I want you to pray it at 3 corners of our house. Now, 3 corners. This house was a square house. It was not a triangular house. And so I was perplexed. Why would Don Cachaco be asking us to pray at 3 corners of his house? I mean, I have enough theological, varied experiences from Catholicism to evangelicalism to Anabaptism and so on that I have heard before of this idea of a prayer of a hedge of protection, where you ask God to completely encircle you and protect you. And so my thought was, why not pray it at all 4 corners? And so my curiosity got the best of me, and I asked Don Cachaco, ¿por qué solamente una oración en las 3 esquinas de la casa? He said, well, if you pray it at all 4 corners, the foxes will die. And I was like, and? He said, but if you pray it at all 3 corners, you will protect my family, you will protect the chickens, and you will give the foxes a means of escape. I went there to be the Christian peacemaker, and it was Don Cachaco who taught me the biggest lesson on peacemaking and love of enemy. Psalm 91 says, whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow, not of the mighty, but of the Almighty. I will say of the divine, you are my refuge and my fortress, and my God in whom I trust. The divine will cover you with divine feathers, will overshadow you, and under divine wings you will find refuge. The divine faithfulness will be your shield and rampart. I shared that story in a Mennonite church in Bogota later that week. And it was the pastor there who was doing a remarkable work of reconciliation between former paramilitary and former guerrillas, who came up to me afterwards and said, you know, it's a beautiful story, but it sounds like you were thinking that the foxes had 4 legs when they might have only had 2.
That we may have peace. He came down that we may have peace. He came down that we may have peace. Hallelujah, forevermore.
Charlotte's sitting with Quakers right now. They haven't said a word yet. What number?
1 and 2.
What number?
259.
259. 1 and 2.
To us a child of hope is born, to us the Son is given. Him shall the tribes of earth obey, and all the hosts of heaven. Him shall the tribes of earth obey, in all the hosts of heaven. Him shall be the Prince of Peace, forevermore adored. The wonderful, the Counselor, the great and mighty Lord. The wonderful, the Counselor, the great and mighty Lord.
Nothing will be impossible for God, with God. Nothing will be impossible with God. Will the public safety training center be built? Nothing will be impossible with God. But all the trees have already been taken and removed. Nothing will be impossible with God. Is it possible that that forest can actually be reforested? Nothing will be impossible with God. It was one in Latin America. There's a tradition, particularly in the Latin American Catholic tradition, of the posadas. This is the time during Advent when for 9 days you remember Jose and Maria's journey to Jerusalem to be registered. And you remember when Mary is going into labor and there is no room at the inn. There is no place to welcome them. Again, and I can't not but think about what we talked about earlier with what is happening in Gaza now. And so what the tradition is that a group of faithful pilgrims will go to someone's home And they do a song where the people on the outside are Mary and Joseph, and the people on the inside of the house are the innkeepers. And it's a song of rejection. And they just kept getting rejected over and over and over and over again. And then finally, when they realize who it is that they're welcoming, then they open up the doors and the people come in and they say prayers and they share a meal together. And they do this for 9 days, 9 different homes each night, if they're truly a faithful adherent to this practice of las posadas, the innkeeping. So one summer, there was one Advent, there was a pilgrimage that was happening. It started in Durham, North Carolina, with a rally with the Reverend William Barber. And then it ended in Birmingham with the Catholic workers at Mary's house and a retreat led by Vincent Harding. I didn't get to join the part in North Carolina, but I joined them from Atlanta to Birmingham. And when they got in Atlanta, we created a stop and we did an immigrant posada. And we walked together from the immigration court, the immigration ICE field office on Ted Turner, and walked past the Atlanta City Detention Center where immigrants are held, and we went past the state capitol where repressive laws were being passed. We went by Georgia State University where undocumented or dreamers are unable to even apply to attend. We went by Grady Memorial Hospital, which at that time had just closed their dialysis clinic, which began to marginalize mostly immigrant populations, including Arturo's sister, not Norma, who also was on dialysis, but his sister, who was on dialysis at the Grady Hospital. And then we ended at the King Center. And we wondered what the beloved community could look like. And then we went to Our Lady of Lourdes Catholic Church, where we were waiting for tamales that were being made by a young woman who was paying her way through a community college, paying international rates, even though she was educated in the state of Georgia, but because she was a dreamer, because she was undocumented, she wasn't eligible for in-state tuition or any federal financial aid. So she was paying the international rate. And so to help supplement that, we had hired her to bring us tamales. And after all that walking, we were hungry for tamales. The tamales were supposed to arrive at 6 o'clock downtown, and 6 o'clock came and left. The tamales were late. Now, culturally speaking, I understood what that meant, or what it could mean. Culturally speaking, in Latino culture, we're just not as Northern European in our punctuality. So I gave grace, but then 6:15 came and folks were getting hungrier and we had to get on to Birmingham. 6:20 came, still no tamales. So finally I text and I learn what the reason for the delay was. And that was that our undocumentable chef and her undocumentable boyfriend had gotten pulled over by the police. And in the state of Georgia, you can't get a driver's license if you don't have documents. In the state of Georgia, as a matter of fact, now it could actually even be a felony to be driving on the roads without a license. What had happened was, if you know downtown Atlanta, at rush hour, there are certain roads where you can make lefts, except not between the hours of 4 and 6. And so they were just 2 blocks away and had made an inappropriate left turn. Had that been you or I, we might have gotten away with a warning. Had that been you or I, we would have just been inconvenienced with just a really dumb mistake that we would have made, and we would have had to take care of a ticket. But for this young couple, they were detained. And so were our tamales. And so we were hungry for tamales, but we were hungry for justice. And so I shared with the 30 some odd folks that were with us on this pilgrimage, and I said, everything that we were talking about in the conceptual, all those stops where I tried to, humanize what policies do to dehumanize, I said, right now, it's playing itself out in real time, just 2 blocks away. Your food and the folks who prepared it have been detained. And so what did the 30 of us do? We sat there in our fear and we prayed. No. We left. We prayed with our feet, as Mennonites say. And we went to the site. We could see the blue lights flashing. It was dark now, right? Think about now, 6:30 in the evening. It's dark out. And we circle around the police officer and the young couple and our tamales. And we're hungry. We're salivating for tamales and for justice. The police officer didn't know what was going on. Like, who were these people gathering around what should have been a normal moving violation? And so I decided that I would approach the police officer, and I told him, listen, you've detained our supper. This is a group of religious folks that have come all the way from North Carolina. We just did a little spiritual pilgrimage. We were at the Catholic church around the corner. We're waiting for our food, and you have a detained. And the police officer explains why, the reason for the stop and everything like that. And I'm like, well, there's something you can do, right? You don't have to arrest the person. Oh, no, I do have to arrest them. They don't have a license. So we go back and forth, and I go back and I give reports to the 30 of us, and we're just standing there in vigil. Now, a friend of mine, Steve, is taking photographs. He's a Steve Pavey is a wonderful documentary. He's an anthropologist who documents social movements, and he's taking all these photographs, and the police officer notices that. So now the police officer comes up to me, he's like, hey, who's that guy? And I was like, oh, he's a tourist. He's taking photographs. He's like, well, tell him if he takes one more photograph, I'm taking the guy to jail. So I go to Steve, and I'm like, Steve, like the guy's saying he's gonna go to jail. If you take one more photograph, it's up to you what you wanna do, but I'm trying to negotiate. I'm trying to see what we can foster here. I go up to the officer, and again, I was like, you know, I spend lots of time accompanying immigrants to the court. And I've learned that there's different things you can do. He's like, listen, I'm not a bad person. I have to enforce the law. It's like, okay, but listen, if I were driving without my license, you could give me a charge that just simply says no license on person, right? You leave home, you forget your purse, you forget your wallet, no license on person. And like, that's like a $20 fine. If you license him for driving unlicensed, you have to arrest him. He has to get fingerprinted. That could lead to deportation. And that's a minimum fine of $500 and 2 days in jail. But if you give him the ticket that says no license on person, you can let him go. The officer said to me, good idea. So I went back to the group, and I'm like telling them, okay, I think things are gonna work out. Let's see what happens. Let's just give this a little more time. Let's just keep holding vigil. The officer waves me over and comes back, and he's like, listen, like I told you before, I'm not a bad cop. I wanna help out. Here's what I'm gonna do. I'm just gonna give him the ticket for the improper turn. That's it. And just tell those folks that not all cops are bad. So we were thrilled. I invited the police officer. I said, why don't you come back and have tamales with us? And he said, sorry, but I've got other tickets that I have to give. Nothing will be impossible with God.
About 268.
Hungry, lonely, afraid, wrapped in the chill of midwinter, comes now among us, born into poverty's embrace, new life for the world. Who is this who lives with the lowly, sharing their sorrows, knowing their hunger? This is Christ, revealed to the world in the cries of a child of the home. Who is the stranger here in our midst, looking for shelter among us? Who is the outcast? Who do we see in the poor, the children of God? Who is this who lives with the lowly, sharing their sorrows, knowing their hunger? So in closing, remember, the Lord is with you, and that we have a Christ who is bigger than our fears, and that the Spirit of the Most High overshadows us and is still present among us. And to quote one of my favorite singer-songwriters, Carrie Newcomber, "Here we stand breathless and pressed in hard times, hearts hung like laundry on backyard clotheslines. Impossible just takes a little more time." Merry Christmas, everyone.